Have you ever tried to use a third-party smartwatch on your iPhone, but it kind of sucks? Or have you wondered, why does iPhone Tap to Pay only seem to work with Apple Pay? Well, the answer, according to the US Department of Justice, is Apple has been rigging the game.
We allege that Apple has consolidated its monopoly power, not by making its own products better, but by making other products worse.
So the DOJ is suing. 88 pages alleging Apple broke antitrust laws, intentionally making the smartphone experience worse for everybody as a way of maintaining a monopoly. It's not the first time Apple's been sued for being anti-competitive, but this is the broadest case against it we've seen.
The Justice Department has just filed a landmark antitrust suit against Apple.
Let's go through it. Smartwatches are a good example of how the DOJ says Apple locks its customers into its ecosystem. So if you own an Apple Watch, you can only use it with an iPhone. You can use other smartwatches with your iPhone too, but they just don't work quite as well. Okay, so you see how with this Apple Watch, I just got a message here, right? And I can reply just right here on the watch. Not now. I'm busy, or however that comes across when you have such a tiny keyboard. That's been a restricted function on third-party watches for years. They have access to your contacts, to your phone's GPS, to your calendar, but replying to a message or accepting a calendar invite in real time? The lawsuit says Apple intentionally crippled the capabilities of third-party watches, reserving them only for Apple Watch owners.
I think the thing that the DOJ really is honing in on is the ways in which Apple makes conscious product decisions to make it so it's really inconvenient to be outside their ecosystem.
Apple knew this would push people to buy the Apple Watch and establish it as an iPhone differentiator, says the DOJ. Basically, it would reinforce the moat, make the Apple Watch experience clearly better than that of other watches, in part by making the experience of other watches worse. And once you're hooked, who's going to switch to Android if it means this watch, which probably cost you hundreds of dollars, becomes useless?
If all you've done is make a really good product, that never becomes illegal. The claim is that they've done things artificially to make other companies unable to compete effectively. And if that's the claim, that's not the same as simply making a good product.
The lawsuit also raises digital wallets as a big red flag. For years, Apple has made it impossible for any third-party wallet to use its tap-to-pay functionality. That's starting to change in the EU, but only after years of legal and political fights. So that Apple Wallet, carrying all of your credit card information, personal ID, movie tickets, even your car keys, and Apple Pay for contactless payment at a store, that's territory Apple has carved out for it and itself only. And it's made a lot of money doing it. A percentage, 15 basis points on every credit card purchase with Apple Pay. And the estimate from the US Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is Apple Pay facilitated nearly $200 billion in transactions in the last fiscal year. Do the math, with that take, Apple's cut could be a cool 300 mil. There's a whole section of the lawsuit devoted to so-called super apps and how Apple undermined their success on the iPhone because they saw them as fundamentally disruptive. Super apps are basically what they sound like. Apps that are designed to do lots of different things, almost like dashboards that can connect you to many different mini programs and functions. WeChat is an example of that. You can use it for text messaging, voice messaging, video conferencing, gaming, photo and video sharing, social media, even mobile payment. It's big in China, but not so much here. Apple, according to the lawsuit, handicapped these types of apps because it worried if the app became too useful, too all-encompassing, it can do everything, then the smartphone experience might become more about the app than the phone it's running on. According to the lawsuit, Apple saw these apps as a major headwind. There's this repeated reference to low stickiness and low switching cost, meaning people might feel less attached to their iPhones if they could get cheaper Android phones with just as effective an app. Super apps could replace usage of the native OS and apps, resulting in the commoditization of smartphone hardware. Basically, Apple doesn't want its iPhone to play second fiddle to any app. So, the DOJ says, Apple restricted how these apps can monetize, how they can advertise, right down to banning the use of icons or tiles for mini programs within the app.
Apple's defense has been its rules do permit super apps. And the difference is that culturally in the US and in other markets around the world, people are not interested in using those so-called super apps.
Messaging is another problem area the lawsuit highlights. SMS is old school text messaging, universal, right? Every phone can do it. But the iPhone blocks third-party apps from using it. So if you use WhatsApp, and let's say you want to message someone who doesn't have WhatsApp, and I'll just do that here. Let's type in a random number in Toronto, 1234567, and WhatsApp is going to tell me this phone number is not on WhatsApp. You're out of luck. That's not the case, though, for Apple's proprietary messaging app. It can communicate with anybody as long as you have their phone number. And then there are the green bubbles.
More so on the green side of things with Android. We've seen a massive divide there.
That's Laquan Hunt. He's a journalist asking Apple's CEO a question about how Android users are treated a bit differently on an iPhone. In Apple's messaging app, your fellow iPhone users appear in blue bubbles. If you're talking to a non-iPhone user, they get green bubbles. And according to the lawsuit, historically, with very limited functionality. Conversations not encrypted, no edits on messages, no typing indicators, and videos that are pixelated and grainy.
Okay. It's tough, not to make it personal, but I can't send my mom certain videos, or she can't send me certain videos. And so we leave
Buy your mom an iPhone.
They laughed, but the DOJ didn't. Its take is that this all sends a message to customers that any other phone or app is just inferior, when it's actually Apple blocking functionality. And this rivalry between Apple and everyone else, it becomes a real thing where you'll have these chats, especially among teens, when in comes an Android user, and then all of a sudden it's like, who just broke the chat? It sounds trivial and silly, but it's a thing. And the iPhone's grip on teens in particular is something the DOJ has taken into account. According to a survey of nearly 10,000 teens in the US, 87% of them owned an iPhone, and 88% expected the iPhone to be their next phone purchase.
In 2023, Apple brought in over $380 billion in revenue, and about 52% of that came from iPhone sales. And Apple constitutes about only 23% of the smartphones worldwide, but the DOJ estimates about 70% of the US smartphone market.
Apple is actually worth almost $3 trillion. For years, it took a 30% cut on the price of all apps, took a 30% cut on all in-app transactions, and last fiscal year, it raked in almost $400 billion, about a quarter of that pure profit. Most countries aren't worth as much as Apple is. The iPhone is the most dominant smartphone platform and ecosystem in the world. Now, maybe at this point, you're thinking, doesn't Apple have a right to do what it wants with its platform?
In the United States, you're allowed to charge very high prices. You're allowed to say, this is my platform. If you want to play on my platform, it's going to cost you money. That can't be the essence of the violation. It has to be that on top of that, on top of simply charging people a lot to play in their sandbox, they've made it impossible for other sandboxes to compete effectively. And that's where the fight's going to be.
Apple responds to the lawsuit in part by saying, this lawsuit threatens who we are and the principles that set Apple products apart in fiercely competitive markets. It continues, if successful, it would hinder our ability to create the kind of technology people expect from Apple, where hardware, software, and services intersect. But ultimately, the DOJ's perspective is this, that the iPhone, above all else, is a platform to do many things. You use it to make calls, sure, but you also use it to listen to music, send text messages, take pictures, play games, watch videos, do your shopping. And a platform, fundamentally, should offer a level playing field to those who do business there. For Apple to willingly open the door to third-party developers, stack the deck in such a way to keep people locked into Apple's ecosystem, that, says the DOJ, is unfair.
People think about breaking up the big firms. That almost never happens. This case is likely simply going to come down to ordering Apple to make certain changes in the way they do business going forward.
The accusation against Apple is that it is a monopoly. And monopolies, if they're found to be so, can be broken up. This case, though, could take years to make its way through the courts.